Hello, this is the lecture video for critical thinking, the Bloom's taxonomy created by Dr. Bloom of the University of Chicago. Dr. Bloom divided thinking into 6 levels, from the most basic to the most advanced level. And you can hardly go a couple feet in a school hallway without hearing people talk about critical thinking or about the Bloom's levels of critical thinking. So this PowerPoint will introduce the concepts. Basically, critical thinking is not about knowing more facts. It's about thinking about what you know. Knowing facts are the bottom level of the critical thinking levels, and to progress past that you have to know more than facts. You have to be able to think about those facts and discover new ideas. As you think harder and more, you get to more interesting information or concepts. The lowest level, therefore, is knowledge. Knowledge is just facts and specific information. If you know who, what, when, where, you have knowledge. Now I'm going to use throughout this PowerPoint the example of the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears, just to give you an easy example of these 6 critical thinking levels. So the knowledge about Goldilocks is just the basics. What is the story? Well, she goes into the woods, she gets lost, she gets tired, she gets hungry, and she comes to the house of the bears where she eats, she rests, and she sleeps. That's it. That's the story. And that would be the knowledge level for Goldilocks. Comprehension is the next level. Comprehension is about understanding why those facts that you just learned at the knowledge level are interesting or important, and what might come next or what they might mean. So if you know why something's important or why it makes a difference, then that's comprehension. Goldilocks, therefore, we know the facts that she gets lost and she goes to the house of the bears. But now let's think about, why is that interesting? Well, one of the reasons it's interesting is that Goldilocks has a real problem. She's lost in the woods and she's hungry and tired and all of that. But she doesn't exactly do something that makes sense or that would be appropriate, because she breaks into the house of the bears. And really, she probably shouldn't have done that unless the situation was life and death, which it wasn't, not yet. So she didn't exactly behave herself there. And that would be comprehension level. In other words, you're taking your knowledge just to the next level. Application is Bloom's 3rd critical thinking level. Application is basically when you can take the ideas you just had and either think of examples or think of how to use those ideas in another situation. So it's taking the concepts and being able to apply them somehow. Say, oh, that's just like this, or oh, I can use that in this other way. So if you can connect what you were just learning to your life or to the broader world, or find some lesson that's learned or something for the future that you could use, then that's application. Application means using the information. Goldilocks. Well, how will we use what we've been thinking about with Goldilocks? We've thought, okay, Goldilocks is a little rude. She didn't quite behave herself. All right, how would I apply that? What would be my lesson learned? Okay, well, the lesson learned might be that Goldilocks, the story, shows us that we need to respect the homes and belongings of others. Okay, so we learned that little lesson from the story. Analysis is the next level up. Analysis is about breaking things into pieces and seeing patterns. It's about taking it apart and seeing what's there and seeing if we can learn something from that activity of taking it apart and looking for the pieces and the patterns. So if you can find more meaning by breaking it up, that's analysis. Or looking at a pattern like, oh, it builds or it falls or whatever. What about Goldilocks? What's the pattern of that story? Well, if you remember, the pattern of the story is that first she eats the porridge in the house of the bears, and then she sits on the bear's chair, the baby bear's chair, and she breaks it. And then she goes upstairs, which is more of a private area for the bear family, and she falls asleep in the bear's bed. Now, if we knew a moment ago that she was wrong to enter the house of the bears, what we can see by doing analysis and looking at the pieces of the story is that she gets more and more bold and rude once she's in the house. I mean, her behavior becomes increasingly worse. That's analysis. So first she eats, but then she breaks a chair, which now she's done actual damage. And then she goes all the way upstairs, again, that's a private area, and she falls asleep in someone else's bed. I really can't think of anything more bold than that. So she's getting worse as she goes along. Synthesis is the next level. Now, when you use synthesis, what you do is you take the ideas you have and you combine them to get some new ideas. You might compare to a related situation, or you might, for example, writing a paper, look at two different sources and see what two different people have to say, and then coming up with your own ideas after comparing what they have to say. So that's synthesis, combining several things to come up with a new lesson. So if you can connect what you're working on to a similar or related situation and draw a new lesson, that's synthesis. For synthesis for Goldilocks, I would compare her to other similar fictional characters. For example, we can compare her to Snow White. Snow White also gets lost in the woods, and she also meets up with some strange creatures there, non-human. She meets the dwarves. And we could maybe compare Goldilocks to Red Riding Hood. Red Riding Hood also gets lost in the woods, and she meets someone dangerous, and she has to defend herself. Now, all three of the stories show these young females lost in the woods and encountering strange creatures. But you'll notice the girls behave very differently, and their different behaviors cause different results. Okay, Goldilocks basically does breaking and entering, and then vandalism. Inadvertent vandalism, but vandalism. Snow White, on the other hand, is very helpful to the dwarves. She keeps house and she's encouraging to them, etc. Red Riding Hood is more bold and strong and brave. And what ends up happening? Goldilocks ends up getting scared out of the house of the bears and running off in the woods. Why? Well, maybe because she's a bad girl. So she has a bad result. But Snow White, she marries Prince Charming. She's a good girl. And Red Riding Hood, she saves her own life. She's bold, she's brave, she's strong. Okay, evaluation level. Evaluation is when you give a final judgment or a decision about the value of something or the place that it has in society or what you would use it for. In other words, evaluation is a judgment. You can't do evaluation without having done the previous steps, okay? And then you can, after you do all of that, you can judge the value or the usefulness of a certain idea. Here's my evaluation for Goldilocks. Looking at the bigger picture, Goldilocks is one of the fairy tale stories that we use and we talk to kids about and everything. Fairy tale stories end up teaching people how to live and what to do, and they're very valuable tools in the development of character and common sense in children. And that's why, for example, the three girls in the three different stories, Snow White, Red Riding Hood, and Goldilocks, have very different results based on their behavior. Those teach valuable lessons to kids. So fairy tale stories in general are useful and valuable tools in the development of children. Thanks very much for your attention.